Hello and welcome to the Safe, Seen, and Stretched book study. This week we're unpacking Chapter 1. We're talking about attention, intention, and commitment because those three things are the keys to making a bigger, more consistent impact on the students you serve. We'll also have some reflection questions and this week's challenge. Ready? Let's go. If you read Safe, Seen, and Stretched, Chapter 1, then you are already familiar with Nancy Russell. Mrs. Russell was the teacher who made a lasting impact on my life. As a first grader, I was a struggling reader. But thanks to Mrs. Russell's patience, persistence, and creative approach, I learned to love reading. And I came to love everything about school, so much that I became a teacher just like Mrs. Russell. And I incorporated so many of the things I remembered from her classroom into my own classroom. And for a few years, I even had the privilege of being Mrs. Russell's principal. And I got to watch her do for other kids what she had done for me all those years ago. In 2015, I left my role as a principal to become a professor, and my beloved Mrs. Russell retired. In my new role, I had to pick a focus for my research, and I kept thinking about Nancy Russell. And I decided what I really wanted to know is, how do teachers like Mrs. Russell make a lasting impact on their students' lives? So I started with my family and friends, just asking them to tell me about a teacher who made an impact. My husband, Brian, we've been together 30 years, told me this story about Mrs. Robinson that I had never heard before. In middle school, he moved from New Jersey to Florida. He felt very out of place. He felt like he didn't belong. He felt a little lost. But in Mrs. Robinson's class, he felt this sense of belonging. He felt important. He felt happy and relaxed. He said it was the one place in school where he really could let his guard down and be himself. And I talked to my lifelong friend Laura, who's an amazing teacher in her own right. She talks about Mrs. Bryant, her English teacher. Now I remember Mrs. Bryant, because she was my teacher too. I never heard these memories that Laura had carried for decades about the way Mrs. Bryant made her feel smart. So it started to occur to me that it's really about the way students feel in our classrooms, the way they feel when they interact with us. And I became committed to exploring this further, trying to figure out what it is that teachers say and do to make an impact, and to try to make this abstract notion of teacher impact more concrete. Now, because of Mrs. Russell, I love stories. I became a qualitative researcher because I could interview people and just collect their stories. And I could look through those stories for themes and try to understand the common meaning of things like teacher impact. And you will notice when you read Safe, Seen, and Stretched that it's a nonfiction book, but it's written in a narrative form. It tells the story of the research project. All of that is because of the foundation Mrs. Russell laid. So as I went out and explored this notion of impact, I realized it's also not always a big thing. Like, we think of impact in these really dramatic ways. A teacher takes a homeless student into her home, or helps a student who's thinking about ending his or her life turn that around. But it's not always these big turnarounds. It's not always these big dramatic moments. So often, the things we remember and the things that really make a lasting impact are small moments. So one of the things we have to do if we want to make this big, consistent impact on our students' lives is pay attention. Because when we pay attention, we can see opportunities for these small moments of impact. We can see when a student is struggling. We can see when something sparks a student's interest. We can see how they respond to the things we say and do. And we're so busy in our classrooms. Our plates are piled so high. Our minds are going so fast. But if we can quiet that down and really focus on the students in front of us, we are much more likely to find an opportunity to make an impact. Sometimes our impact is serendipitous. We say the right thing to the right kid at the right time. But if we want to make a consistent impact, we have to do it with intention. So we have to be very intentional about how we want students to feel in our classroom. Because by setting that intention, we will act and interact in ways that help students to feel the way we intended. If I think about Mrs. Russell, she was very purposeful in building my sense of confidence. She interacted with me in this really patient, calm way, and because she believed in me, I learned to believe in myself. And I think sometimes about how differently I would see myself as a learner if she had shown frustration or been impatient with me. She was so intentional about building my sense of confidence as a reader. I'm certain that Mrs. Robinson intentionally wanted to create a space where students felt a sense of belonging, and she put procedures and other things in place in her classroom to encourage that. And I know Mrs. Bryant, so I know she was very intentional about helping her students feel smart in her English class, and her interactions with Laura absolutely show that she acted and interacted in ways that increased the likelihood that kids would feel that way. So if we set an intention for how we want our students to feel, and we act and interact in accordance with that intention, we are much more likely to make an impact on our students. And it won't happen by accident. It will happen on purpose because we're purposeful. Paying attention and setting an intention are simple but not easy. They require commitment. In Chapter 1 of Save, Seen, and Stretched, we start in the middle of the action, collecting stories about teacher impact at a farmer's market, and my encounter with Ellen, who told this story about Mr. Dillon, her high school speech teacher, that she has carried for decades. Ellen was in her 80s when I met her, and somehow she's hung on to this very clear, detailed memory of Mr. Dillon. She said he was well known in their town as this great speech teacher and orator, and he was diagnosed with throat cancer, but he promised the kids he'd be back. When he came back, he was still recovering from the cancer and the treatment, and it took a little while for them to adjust. He was thin, he seemed more frail than he had been before, but Ellen said after a while he was just Mr. Dillon again, and he continued to teach them with such passion and commitment. She said he has inspired her through every challenge since, and she continues to use him as a model for perseverance and strength. And I thought, sometimes the best teaching tool we have is our own life, is the way that we deal with challenges, is the commitment that we demonstrate for our kids. Such a beautiful story, such a lasting impact. It's not always these big planned things. It's how we want to show up for our kids, the kind of classrooms we want to create. I hope this first chapter of Save, Seen, and Stretched has helped you think differently about teacher impact, has helped you understand what students really carry and remember from their time with you, and more than anything, I hope it started to affirm for you how very important you are and your work is with kids. I can't wait to unpack Chapter 2 with you, but first, I've got some reflection questions and this week's challenge. Reflection question 1. Think about a teacher who made a lasting impact on your life. What did that teacher say or do to make an impact? What would you like to take from that teacher's model and incorporate into your own classroom to make an impact on your students? Feel free to pause the video if you'd like. Take some notes on this reflection question. We'll be right back with reflection question 2. Reflection question 2. Think about a time you made a lasting impact on a student's life. Remember, it's not always big things. Sometimes it's small things, and there are signs that we're making an impact. when a quiet student starts volunteering and speaking up in class, when a grumpy student is smiling coming into your classroom, those are all signs you're making an impact. And what did you say or do that made an impact on a student's life? Take a few minutes to reflect on that. Pause the video if you need to. We'll be right back with this week's challenge. This week's challenge. Set an intention for how you want the people around you to feel. It's summer for many of us. We may not be teaching with students in a classroom right now. Try this with family, friends, colleagues. How do you want the people in your presence to feel? How can you act and interact with them in ways that make that intention a reality for them? Pay attention, be intentional, commit to this week, make a big impact. I can't wait to unpack chapter 2 with you next week. And thank you for making a lasting impact on students' lives.
Don't miss any of our upcoming content. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. And we'd love it if you'd head over to Amazon and leave a review of Saved, Seen, and Stretched in the Classroom. It will help other readers find the book.